Hello, hello, hello. I hope you all are having a fantastic Tuesday. Let's get started. Chapter 12 Amnesiac. Ariel woke slowly, stretched tired limbs, and looked about. The hospital. It seemed to stretch into the remote past. She could scarcely remember a time when it wasn't all around her. The world beyond it was vague in her mind. A city, she recalled. No, a city. A city of earth, a humming hive of people, people, people. Beyond, though, was space and stars and spacer worlds. Robot City was there, and Derek, and the human medical team, Woolruff and Mandelbrot, who had been called Alpha long ago. Aranimus, too, was out there somewhere. Beyond that, Aurora. She couldn't remember. Aurora. Everybody knew about Aurora. Planet of the dawn, first settled from Earth, land of peace and contentment and civilization, richest and most powerful of the spacer worlds. The world she'd called home and which had exiled her, leaving her to die alone. But no memories came. She couldn't remember her home world. She couldn't remember her parents, her school, her first robot. Of course not. She'd had an mnemonic plague. Burundi's fever, they called it in the spacer worlds. She had lost her memory. But she was alive. Ariel began to weep. A robot was at her bedside, a silly Earth robot with a cheerful face. "Miss Avery, are you well? We have been ordered to minimize drug dosages to let you recuperate, but if your distress is too intense, we can give you tranquilizers." With an effort she calmed herself enough to say, "Thank you. I'm quite well. I merely weep in relief that I am alive. I did not expect to survive." The spell had broken. She found the weeping fit over. She was hungry, she told them so, and was promptly fed. Afterward, feeling tired, very tired, vastly tired, from long lying in even the cleverest hospital bed with all its muscle tone-retaining tricks, she drifted off to sleep. When Ariel awoke, she was aware again of who she was, and that she had a mnemonic plague. She had survived. They told her that her memories would return gradually, based on the foundation they'd implanted in her brain. She didn't believe them, but she didn't care. She was alive. When she'd eaten again, they told her, "Your husband's here." Husband? For an awful moment she was totally blank. My what? They led in a thin, hollow-eyed boy. "Your husband, Derek Avery," said the robot. After a moment she recognized. "His name isn't Derek," she said, and at his anguished expression she halted. No, David was dead. He'd died of carbon monoxide poisoning on Robot City. No, he'd disappeared. She didn't know what had happened. Her memories were scrambled, were gone. Derek! After a moment she asked, hesitatingly, half knowing it was wrong, half fearing it was wrong. "Husband? Why, of course," he said, smiling. He looked so thin. The smile was a grimace on his wasted cheeks. Her heart bumped painfully, and she felt a pricking in her eyes. One of his eyes closed, then opened as he continued, confidently. "Some things come back faster than others, they tell me. Not much of a compliment to me that our wedding wasn't the first thing he remembered." Ariel smiled and thought, Avery! She couldn't remember how that name of all names was stuck on them. She knew he hadn't been going under it. But no doubt there was a logical exclamation that she would remember in due time. She remembered now their escape from Robot City, their use of the key, leaving Woolruff and Mandelbrot, and their arrival on Earth in a sparse apartment. Still smiling faintly, she leaned back and said, "I do remember now, but it's all a little faint, like a remembered dream. I hope you won't quiz me on it till I've had time to remember more." "Of course," he said, and that instant he had completed the phrase, a robot broke in. "The doctor's directions are do not attempt to force the memories. It would be better, Mr. Avery, if you never questioned her about your past or hers." "Yes, I've been told. Thank you," he said with true spacer politeness toward robots. Here in the hospital the med-techs and nurses called them all "boy." "So, when can I get out of this place and out?" she asked, feeling the suffocating terror of claustrophobic closing in. Gamely she fought against it. It had been her constant companion since she'd arrived in the hospital, and all during her illness she had battled it. If not for tranquilizers, she'd have lost her mind while losing her memory. "Well, you're still pretty weak physically, and the doctors aren't sure about your memory. They want to keep you here for a couple more days, just on mind games. After that, I dunno. Our Jenny, do you know?" "Mr. Avery must Miss Avery must have several days of physical therapy before she can safely leave the hospital, Mr. Avery," said the robot. "As for her memory, and her mind generally, I have not been informed." "If I don't get out of here soon, I'll go mad," she said with a sudden vehemence that startled her. There was an impulse to resist what her conditioning told her was a lapse into madness, but she had had all she could take of concrete caverns and crowds of troglodytes. "I want to see the sun again, and breathe air, and feel the grass, and—" Abruptly she was weeping, for in the midst of this catalogue of sights that she had not seen since her memory began, there came a sudden demanding vision, an image of a garden somewhere, of bright light and flowers and warmth, drowsy warmth, with bees humming sweetly on key and the scent of orange blossoms. Someone she loved lay just out of sight. Ariel turned over and wept passionately for some minutes, her face in her pillow. She felt a hand on her shoulder, not a robotic hand, and felt faintly grateful, but was too wretched to turn. A detached, floating calm gradually washed away her tears, leaving her tired but spent. Tranquilizer. The robot never gave her more than a few minutes to weep. They usually allowed her that, or she'd have gone mad from the inability to express her emotions at all. When she turned, Kolenko was there, frowning in conversation with Derek. She must remember always to call him Derek. That was right. That was what the Earthers called him. But there was another reason, which she couldn't quite recall, why she must not use his true name. Or did she know his true name after all? She had forgotten so much. Could she trust that memory too? Avery, she thought, remotely astonished. The drug made all emotions remote. She wondered vaguely where Dr. Avery was now. Still on Robot City, she supposed. For a moment she felt an ironic amusement at the thought that they had been using his apartment, his robot, and his funds on Earth. Then she knew this was an old amusement. She'd had this thought before, and with that thought she remembered having had the amusement before. "Memory is like drink," she said to the uncomprehending robot. She felt a little light-headed. The nurse and the robot stepped aside as they spoke together, and Ariel looked shocked at Derek. "Why is he so thin?" she demanded abruptly. "Mr. Avery? He has been under strain, Mrs. Avery. He has been worried about you and has not been eating sufficiently. Does he have—" Her heart stopped, started painfully. "Brundy's fever?" Again her heart shook her. "No, Miss Avery, he is merely under a strain." "He's sick," she said. "No, Miss Avery, he is sick," Ariel said positively, peering at him narrowly with the observant eyes of one who has recently passed near to the gates of death. "He is dying." Nurse Krolenko heard enough of that to frown at her, and one of the robots, our Jenny, Ariel thought, went to the control board at the head of the bed, but merely checked the readings. "Derek is a young fool who has neither been sleeping nor eating, and who has spent all his time brooding over you," said Kolenko, angry not at Derek, but at his stupidity. "There's nothing else to do in that stupid apartment but stare at the ceiling," Ariel said, irritated on his behalf. Why did he keep staring at her with eyes like holes in space? Frost was not even a tri-dimensional there. "You wanted to experience life as Earth people do, and apparently low-rated Earth people at that, so you have no more than they do," Kolenko said, shrugging. "Wanted to experience?" She turned her eyes in inquiry on Derek, who shrugged also, grimacing ruefully. "Perhaps you don't remember that the Institute wiped our memories temporarily before we came to Earth, so we wouldn't be able to reveal the techniques," he said. Ariel could only stare in amazement. "When you're well enough to travel, we'll leave. Of course, since you've been discovered here, our purpose of sociological study is negated, And once back on Aurora, we'll have our own recorded memories re-implanted. She had heard none of this. The Institute? Institute of what? Study? Of Earth? But own recorded memories re-implanted. Ariel leaned back and for a moment thought tears would leak from her eyes. So you've lost your memory twice over, but it's only temporary. I'd like to know how it's done, growled a baritone voice. After a moment Ariel identified it. Dr. Powell. She'd heard it often enough in the past weeks. I know, you haven't the foggiest, only a brief layman's description that doesn't describe. When she opened her eyes, they were all around her bed, before Jenny at the controls. Well, young lady, your request for a visit to the outdoors is a bit unusual. He visibly repressed a shudder of distaste at the thought, and Ariel, fascinated, realized that to this man the outside was more fear-inspiring than the claustrophobic city was to her. We can't very well add you to the list on a spacer acclimatization group, and the only other people who go outside are the odd farming, mining, and pelagic overseers. They're solitary as well as agrophiliac. Very strange types. They wouldn't book like an addition. Certainly not a spacer, and there's no one else to take care of you. Robots? She asked, weakly looking at our Jenny. The doctor frowned, shook his head. It's difficult to remove a robot through the city without having it mobbed and destroyed. Robots are being restricted more and more each year. We have half as many here now at Towner Laney than when I was an intern. That leaves only your husband, and frankly, if in a couple of days you'll be taking care of him. I'm all right, said Derek, with a flash of irritation that, for a moment, brought back the companion of the hospital statesman. Ariel couldn't remember the name, but she remembered the station, and of Robot City. What's the signal coding of the local TBI office of the TBI? The what? Dr. Powell stared at him. The comm number? Why would you want to call the Terrys? From his tone it was obvious, he had guessed, and ceased at the thought. To get authorization to have robots move through the motorways, and permission to leave the city, if only for a short period. Medically, it would do her good, doctor, said the nurse quietly. Damn it, but we would need to be sure that her mental condition, the implants. We can't keep bringing her back and forth, I admit, said Korolenko. Ariel, could you hold off till tomorrow? Derek asked. Tomorrow. She was tired from inaction and drugs that she'd sleep till then anyway. Ariel could have stood anything for tomorrow in the sun. Oh, yes. She'd be good, Ariel had a moment of vivid memory, herself quite young, promising her mother that she'd be very, very good. Was that when she'd been given her first robot? Or was that Boopsy, the pup? When the first vivid re-experience faded, she'd looked up and they'd drawn apart. It was no matter. It would be all right tomorrow. Never saw myself as nursemaid to a couple of spacers and a robot, said Donovan. The agent in charge had not trusted any of his men to go outside. The hospital had an emergency entrance and egress for ambulances, and was a major junction on the motorways. Our Jenny carried Ariel down in its arms, Ariel having chosen that over being wheeled, strapped to a gurney, or in a chair with wheels. The hospital had supplied an ambulance, but the Terry eyed it with distaste. We'll use the bureau car, he said. There's room for 4 of us, robot or no. Our Jenny gently put Ariel into the back seat and got in beside her, the car creaking and sinking under the weight until the suspension system analyzed the imbalance and compensated for it. Derek and Donovan got into the front seat, and the agent took the controls and sent them surging silently down a ramp and into the lit but dim-seeming tunnel. For a moment Ariel fought a scream, a tensing. The claustrophobia was worse in such tight passages, but she fought it off, helped by the speed of their passage. Signs blurred past soundlessly as the Terry tapped more and more of the beaming power. Once the ceiling lit up in bloody light, and the winking yellow arrows along the walls gave obscure warning. Then a blue car whipped by in either direction, Donovan having avoided it with the warning. Like the models we trained on, murmured Derek, glancing back at her. For a moment she was blank on that. Then she remembered the roofless roads and the emergency vehicle monitors, the remote control sweaty in her hand, and the laughing students crowding around. But that was nothing like this dim, empty wormhole. Glendale, Kirkwood, Manchester, Winchester, Baldwin, Ellisville. The signs flowed past as fast as the expressway would have taken them. Ariel ignored all the labyrinth branchings and windings that twisted obscurely away right and left out of sight, peering past Derek to see as far before them as possible. The tunnel was a rectangle of dim light, two glowing tracks overhead and a pair of glowing, beaded tracks on the sides, the last being the glowing signs, fading into tininess. At last, though, there came an interruption in the shape of the tunnel. It got dark at the limit of vision, the darkness outlined in light. Presently the outline of light appeared as various warning signs. The darkness was a ramp leading up. Donovan slowed sharply, causing our Jenny to lean forward and prepare itself for a snatch at the controls. "Don't worry, boy," said Terry, grinning but not looking back. Ariel had him in profile. "I've driven for thousands of hours faster than this, no problems." 21.3% of all major traumas to enter Townie Laney Memorial Hospital occur in the motorways, said our Jenny unperturbed. Fewer than 20% occur on the ways. A few thousand humans use the motorways, 7 million use the ways. "Damn it, I always hate know-it-all robots," grunted Donovan, taking the ramp with unnecessary flair. "Can never stand to live on any space world. A man should have the right to go to hell in his own way." The car eased to a stop at the barrier, and Donovan played a tune on his computer controls, and the barrier opened. He drove through. They wound a complicated path that apparently avoided heavy traffic. There was thunderous rushing sounds through the walls, but no traffic in their motorway, and they were at a huge entry in the outer wall. Kilometer-long lines of great trucks full of produce, some robot-driven, most computer-controlled, roared in with noisy huge tires with silent engines, and dived into the city just below them. They were on a higher ramp, one of a dozen that leaped out of the city from high and low. Donovan stopped the car, well back away from the light-blazing gap. "You'll have to walk from here," he said abruptly. "Car won't go any further. No beam cast beyond the barrier." And thus ends this chapter. I hope you enjoyed. This was a very funny chapter, uh, especially because he put it as Ariel's point of view, and he usually puts it as Derek's point of view. And I don't know about you, but it kind of felt like all the dialogue was derived from a play like The Crucible. It all sounded very old-fashioned and pedantic. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed. The next part comes out on Saturday. Bye!